Welcome to part 2 of Introduction to Synthesizers, where today I'm going to look at synthesis methods. And in front of us we have the MT220, which is a PCM type keyboard, which is pulse code modulation, and this uses a form of sample binary to store the waveform. And we have it hooked up to an oscilloscope, and the oscilloscope will show us the waveform as it tracks through time. And I'm going to play a note on the keyboard here, and that's the piano preset, which should die away, and you'll see that the waveform dies away in its envelope. And I'm going to do that again, and you'll see all the harmonics there changing. And now just listen to the piano, and that's the envelope dying away. And we'll just switch over to the organ on this keyboard, and this sounds like, which is a sustained envelope. It doesn't actually decay away, and we'll watch that on the oscilloscope. And we can see it's continually oscillating there, varying its harmonics, and that is what the waveform sounds like. So this is a visual indication of what you're actually hearing, and that's the MT220 creating that waveform using PCM, which is quite a realistic version of the instrument. But there are other synthesis methods, and I'm going to look at those as well as the PCM. So this is the beginning of part 2.
As we can see from the diagram, the pulse code modulation format is a way of enciphering a sample. So the sample itself is a measurement of the amplitude of a waveform at any given moment, and the pulse, sometimes the measurement of the time of the pulse or the length of the pulse, is a way of enciphering the binary encoding of the waveform measurement, and that is what it is that's stored inside the ROM chips inside these keyboards. And that produces quite a realistic sound when it's unciphered back into the waveform and reproduced at the output of the keyboard. So we can demonstrate some of the sounds on the MT220. As well as the piano and organ, we have a vibraphone, violin, trumpet, funky clavie, electric piano, pipe organ, human voice, flute, and synth sound. And of course the MT220 also has orange drum pads on board, which produce some drum noises, and there's also a drum machine on here that plays PCM drums, which you'll find on all of the MT range, I think, have this facility. And that's pretty much what this keyboard does. Casio actually produced a set of orange drum pads which plug into the side of these instruments, several in this particular range. I think the MT520 and the MT500 and the 640, all except the DP1 drum pads. So you can essentially be a drummer as well as a keyboard player by using these add-on pads. But if you haven't got those, they've helpfully put little orange pads into the keyboards themselves. I think the MT205 has not got the drum pads on board, but you can still plug them in. So it's a nice feature on these keyboards. And the binary encoding of the waveforms is more a realistic representation perhaps than some of the previous synthesis methods, which were the old analog additive and subtractive keyboards, which we'll come to eventually. And also the previous keyboard which we looked at, the MT100, was using not this synthesis method. It was using a kind of constructive synthesis of different electronic components to create the waveform, and it was a rather cruder representation. This is almost like a real sample of the actual instrument. So that is how it is that the MT220 and other similar keyboards by Casio of the MT variety are producing this type of sound. The other synthesis methods that we'll be looking at is the AWM system, which Yamaha uses, which is advanced wave synthesis, and the FM synthesis, which is frequency modulation, Casio's PD, which is phase distortion, and the additive and subtractive methods, as well as sampling, which is a direct recording of the real world instrument, which is probably the nearest approximation to an actual instrument that you can get. So in this case we've tried to explain the pulse code modulation system, and I hope that's given an indication of what that is actually about.